Good morning, everyone. No one's sitting in the front. Mike Hilgers, Nebraska Attorney General. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for those for being online. Just before we start, again, a little bit of housekeeping. We sent out the media advisory. People can send in text messages just to make you aware we've had a little OCI. Don't want to blame OCIO. We've had some state tech difficulties, I think unrelated to the lawsuit that we filed. But text messages are coming in a little bit slow. So if you have text messages in, have a little patience, please. We'll get to them at the end. I would like to focus this press conference primarily on the issue today because I think it's actually one of the biggest days in this office's history, which I'll explain why in a second. But if we have time at the end, I'm happy there are other topics on people's minds if there are other questions. We haven't had a press conference in a little while, so if there are other topics, happy to answer them. I do think that today is one of the biggest days in the history of the Nebraska Attorney General's office. And that is because today, through a landmark settlement with Meta, we have achieved some of the most important relief, both for the state to help abate the impact of social media on kids, but also to empower parents to help protect kids. One of the most important responsibilities that I have, and one of the greatest focuses I have had since I've been elected, is to help protect kids and help empower parents, especially in the day of social media and the prevalent use and the impact of social media services with young kids, in particular young girls. I've talked a lot about it, talked about the impact that it had on me reading the Anxious Generation book, the impact that it's had on mental health issues in our community. It has driven an enormous amount of work in our office. And that includes everything from lawsuits, like our lawsuit against TikTok, which is going to trial next year, our lawsuit against Roblox, lawsuit against other companies, including Meta. It's also included significant amount of legislation, including LB 140, which we worked on with the governor, to get phones out of schools, which anecdotally seems to have had an enormously positive impact on schools around the country. The litigation has been at the core of our efforts, and one of the most significant cases we have filed is a case against Meta. As everyone knows, they have both Facebook, which I don't think a lot of kids use, but also Instagram, which a lot of kids use, and it really have been the heart of our efforts. Our claims against Meta were that not that necessarily the products in and of themselves cause harm, which they do, but is that in deploying those products to kids and targeting kids and not being honest with parents, they were violating our Consumer Protection and Deceptive Trade Practices Act. My view is if you're not going to ban these products, you have to be honest with parents about the tools and the harm. They were not doing so. That's why we filed this lawsuit in October 2023. Well, as of this morning, in federal court, we have filed, along with all the other states that we worked with, a landmark settlement with Meta, subject to court approval, which we expect but don't want to get ahead of, that has two significant components, both of which, standing on their own, either of which standing on their own, would be absolutely significant and game-changing. The first, and maybe the most important, is the injunctive relief. The reason we filed the case was not to just get monetary damages. That was always a part of what we were trying to do. But the reason we filed the case was to protect kids and empower parents, period, full stop. We were concerned when we filed the case that the tools that were available to parents were not effective. They weren't as strong as they needed to be. The messaging around them were deceptive. All of that changes with this lawsuit. This settlement. I just want to highlight a couple of these things, which are, I cannot overstate the significance. As a father of 4 kids, 3 girls, one of whom I just got her first phone. She's 15. This is enormous for me as a dad. The first is there is a restricted use for using Instagram and Facebook for kids 17 and under. Right now, that time is between 12 and 6 in the morning. It is inoperable. Now, you may remember when I filed the lawsuit against TikTok that it had one of the most disturbing, if not sad, statistics that we could present in one of these cases, which is that for TikTok at least, Nebraska was number 2 in the country for highest per capita use, of underage use of their platform between the hours of roughly 12 and 5. That is a mind-boggling, shocking statistic, and it's a sad statistic. Under this agreement, Instagram and Facebook will be inoperable, not usable, completely, essentially offline for 17 and under, kids 17 and under between the hours of 12 and 6. There's a component, which I'll talk about here in a second, where our relief is stronger and more robust if more of the industry signs on. If more of the industry signs on, that time range will go from 12 to 6 to 10 at night to 7 in the morning. If we just achieve that, that would be an enormous win. But the second thing we achieved is as important, and that is we achieved actual real limits on the use of Instagram and Facebook by children in the state of Nebraska. Those limits is 2 hours. They can use it up to 2 hours a day. Now, right now, again, there's this expansion if other industry participants join. But right now, under this agreement, it's 2 hours, and that's across Facebook and Instagram. Now, I know my kids would tell me no one under the age of 17 uses Facebook, but if they do, that counts towards their 2 hours. If the industry joins, it will be a 60-minute limit per program. So 60 minutes for Facebook, 60 minutes for Instagram. By the way, all of these have parental control, so the parents can't opt them out. So for instance, if you have a child who helps you with your business, you've got a business that advertises on Instagram or on Facebook, or for any other reason, the parents have the power to be able to choose to opt them out of these restrictions, but the defaults are these will be restricted for kids. Then the next thing is the algorithmic feed. So one of the big concerns for us is that these have the casino-like dopamine-driven features that just keep kids hooked. Now, we're gonna have a time limit, but now there's an option to no longer have the algorithmic feed, and what you essentially get is what Facebook was back in, say, 2004, 2005, which is what is kind of the chronological post of all the people in your friend group. That is a far different program than the algorithmic casino-like just feeding you dopamine hits digitally, which is very significant. By the way, I didn't mention it in the first category. Not only will it will be inoperable during 10, 12, and 6, it also during the school day will have significant restrictions. It won't be inoperable, but notifications will not be used, which is a big part of the distraction that we see in schools. The last thing I want to say is they are, in terms of the adjunctive relief, that I want to emphasize, I should say, and there's more, but these are the four core components, is that the age restrictions, the use of their technology to actually stop kids under the age of 17 from using their site without parental consent will actually be far more robust than they are today. That was one of our concerns, that there were age restrictions, but that Meta, and true for other social media companies, were not using the enormous power of their algorithms and their data to actually stop kids who are underage from using their program. Those four things, any one of those individually would have been huge. All four together truly is landmark. So that's a little bit sense of the injunctive relief. I could not be more pleased with the outcome there. The monetary relief is also very significant. So the largest lawsuit, or the largest settlement in state history, as you know, is the tobacco settlements. That was with an entire industry, a lot of different companies. This is not bigger than that, but it is the largest single defendant settlement in the history of the state of Nebraska. Under this settlement, Nebraska will receive up to $201 million. Up to $201 million. Now the floor is $145 million. It's 140, and then there's this related to a separate case, this Cambridge Analytica case, there's an additional 5. So Nebraska is guaranteed $145 million. It will be in 10-year increments. The way that the payments will, if it all gets approved, we anticipate $33 million will be paid to the state of Nebraska by the end of January 2027, with the rest coming over the course of the remaining 10 years of the agreement. That number can go from $145 million to $205 million, essentially, with industry buy-in. So if we have industry buy-in, we have enough of a critical mass on the injunctive relief in particular, then that number goes up to $201 million. Now I want to emphasize, this office oftentimes does leverage outside counsel to achieve, to be able to prosecute our lawsuits, because we have a consumer protection group of 6.5 lawyers. To take on the biggest companies in the world, we need more help. This case in its entirety was handled by the Nebraska Consumer Protection team. From beginning to end, and including the entirety of the middle, there was no outside counsel help, which means every dime that I just referenced, up to $205 million, will go to the state of Nebraska. None will go to legal fees. The last thing I want to say before I open it up to questions is I just want to give a specific thanks to that team. Nebraska was heavily involved in this case. My predecessor, General Peterson, announced the initial investigation in Instagram before I took office. We were one of the lead states, taking this case on when I started, and we have been heavily involved from the beginning. We were on the negotiating committee. Eric Fern on my team, who's the consumer protection chief, was heavily involved helping negotiate this particular settlement. Bibi Sternad, my former consumer chief, who's now my general counsel, was there from the beginning. And I want to give a special shout out to Anna Anderson, who has just been out of law school since 2024, and has been the primary lawyer going against people who make $2,000 to $3,000 per hour, some of the biggest law firms in the country, defending and fighting for Nebraskans. Without their tireless efforts, we wouldn't be here for the state. I want to give them a specific shout out. And I also want to say, if you're a young lawyer who wants to go make a difference for the state of Nebraska in your community, come work at the Attorney General's office, because there's no place in the country where you can do that amount of good and get that kind of experience and be able to go against the best and beat the best than right here. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. It's an incredible day for Nebraska parents, Nebraska kids, and the entire state. Yeah.
Could you tell us, remind us, the pot of money, I guess, where does that go?
So the question is, where does the money go? It is not, so it will go into our Consumer Protection Cash Fund, subject to appropriation by the legislature. So in general, it will be the legislature working with the governor to appropriate that as they need to. Now, at a high level, Josh, just the agreement has some requirement across all of the states. And by the way, I think 47 states signed on. I think with territories, it might be 51. That for the whole pot of money, which is in the billions, half go to abatement. Now, that doesn't apply directly to Nebraska, but I do think it's worth, especially as we have other lawsuits. We have a trial against TikTok, as I mentioned, in April. We don't intend to settle that. We're going all the way to trial. We have a big damages award we're seeking from them. That there should be some thoughtful conversation. We encourage thoughtful conversations, and probably would try to convene some of those conversations to see whether or not those dollars could be, how those dollars are deployed to help abate the crisis, and do things that will be in the long-term benefit of the state. But legally speaking, Josh, they are not restricted. It'll go to the Consumer Cash Fund, and the state can appropriate it as it sees fit. Yeah, Zach?
As far as the timeline on those funds, and the use of the settlement has to still be finalized by the court, what is the timeline for that, and when would Nebraska see the money?
Yeah, so great question. So Zach's asking timeline. It's in front of the court now. I don't ever want to rush a judge. I would imagine we would get some sort of decision fairly soon, since it's an agreement between, there's a landmark in many different ways, but one of them is you have a huge bipartisan coalition. Almost the entire country has agreed to this. I don't want to say when exactly it would be, certainly sometime this year, if not much sooner than that. Our first payment, which would be $14 million for the base payment, plus $5 million for the side, this Cambridge Analytical, so $19 million, will be paid sometime in the calendar year 2026, in the remaining months that we have. Then our next payment for 2027, so another $14 million. I think it's unrealistic to expect industry buy-in in the next 4 months. $14 million will be paid in January. So that's why earlier I was saying by the end of January 2027, we anticipate that there will be $33 million check wire to the state of Nebraska in hand. By the way, I would just, and John, I'll get to you in a second, just to clarify how the mechanics work. If we get industry buy-in in year 4, then on the so we get $14 million each year. If we get industry buy-in later, we actually get a catch-up. So the $6 million per year for say 26, 27, 28 would be paid in 29 if that's when we get industry buy-in. Yeah, John.
What's the timeline for Facebook rolling out those changes that you mentioned?
They are detailed in the settlement agreement. That depends on the feature. I don't want to misspeak. Some are 90 days. Some might be 30 days. They're not immediate, but they're very soon.
So we will start seeing changes this calendar year?
Yes, depending on the court entering the consent decree, but yes. I didn't say that wrong, right? Okay, yeah. Yeah, any other questions? Yeah, Zach.
Some of those changes with Facebook's algorithm and protections are similar to the bill you worked on with Senator Boswell.
Mm-hmm.
You can talk about what the current state is in Nebraska with, I know there's the federal lawsuit as well with verification. What's the current state of play for all social media in Nebraska?
Yeah, it's good. So as you know, the bills passed by Senator Boswell are being litigated. They've been partially enjoined by Judge Gerard. That's on appeal right now. This won't directly impact the litigation because this is not a Meta. That's from NetChoice, not Meta, so NetChoice is not part of this agreement, so the litigation continues. I'd say from Meta's perspective, this largely puts them in compliance with the requirements of that law, especially if the requirements of the law that were not enjoined. The one part of the law where it wouldn't fully is some of the parental consent requirements, but the parental consent requirements are enjoined right now, and so for Meta, they're in compliance with everything. Now, if we win that lawsuit and we win on the 8th Circuit and we get a reversal or significant reversal, that will put the other social media companies largely out of compliance, we think. But at least for Meta, this is this puts them in compliance. And if we get industry buy-in, I mean, one of the significant things about this is it creates, market's the wrong word, but it sort of like sets the market on injunctive relief. And so now this is where the states are. This is where the country is on expectation for how you're going to treat our kids if you have a social media company. So I do not anticipate, certainly from Nebraska, I only speak for Nebraska, but I would anticipate, Zach, no other state in the country will accept injunctive terms that are any weaker, or they're not as strong as what we agreed to with Meta. And so what I anticipate, I hope I should say, is that this will become where the industry goes. Other industry participants will sign on to this injunctive relief, and it will require or even sort of obviate the need for state legislative solutions, which can be imperfect in this world and can be blunt force instruments. So that's my hope. So that's kind of the state of where things are with the law, but I think where this really can go is maybe significantly reduce, never want to say completely eliminate, but significantly reduce the need or the pressure for state legislators to get involved. Yeah, John.
What message do you hope that this settlement sends to other social media companies?
That's a good question, John. So the question is, what message do I hope it sends? I think it shows a couple things. The message it sends is a couple things. Number one, we're going to see this thing to conclusion. This is not an easy settlement for Meta. Almost $20 billion, enormous injunctive relief. The states are coming out the winner of this particular settlement. So, and the reason they are is because we fought to the end. This was in trial in a number of different places, and we had the courage and ability to fight to the end. So any other social media company should look at this and say, Nebraska at least, we are not settling without absolute relief for parents and children in the state of Nebraska. We're not getting out early. We don't care how many fancy lawyers you hire. We don't care how much you spend on legal fees. We don't care how many New York lawyers come into our courtrooms. We're going to fight until we get the relief that we seek. And I think that's the most important thing. I would also say they should take a hard look at what I just was saying to Zach, which is, look, this is where the industry should go. And they should take a hard look at the injunctive terms that we agreed to with Meta and see how they can do at least as good as that. But the last one is, for everyone who we haven't settled with, we are going to fight until we get the relief that we seek. And we're not settling early. We can't be bought off. We're just going to go until we get what we need for Nebraska kids and parents. Yeah, Josh.
You described your team, being really involved in this case, right? You see all these lawyers, and it's easy to think like, oh, someone out there took the lead, but it seems like Nebraska's pretty present. Can you tell us basically why? I mean, was it just a matter of like, we want this, we need the willpower? Why Nebraska is prominent in this?
It's a great question. So Josh asked why Nebraska? Why were we prominent in the leadership? And there are a lot of other states who helped lead. I do not want to convey, not your question, but I don't want to convey that we were, the one doing all the work. That wasn't the case. But I think a couple reasons. One is Nebraska was a leader from the beginning. I mean, as I mentioned, Doug Peterson launched the initial investigation in Instagram. It was his. I don't think this is overstating it, but it was almost his brainchild to even bring the investigation in the first place. I think also Nebraska has a tremendous amount of respect nationally. This isn't the only case where we're in the middle with the biggest states in the country, with California or with Texas or with Florida, working not just as a ride-along state, which I'm not minimizing that, but on executive committees or on negotiating committees or leading the charge substantively. And so I think Nebraska has built a reputation, and a well-deserved reputation based on the lawyers that are here in my office, as being elite at what they do, being fair-minded, not being ideological, just trying to get great results. And I think this is critical, Josh. I like to think we're very good to work with. We treat people honestly, we treat people fairly, we listen. If you work in a blue state or a red state, it doesn't matter to us. We're trying to do the right thing by our consumers. And I think we have built a very hard-won reputation in our office as doing great work, working really hard, being good to work with, and being thoughtful of the way we go about our business. And I give all the credit to the lawyers on our team. But I think that's a lot of it. And the fact that on this one, we were sort of leading the charge early. Yeah, John.
You mentioned your personal connection, as a father. Were there any particular anecdotes or data points throughout this process that really stood out to you, underscored the importance of getting this settlement and getting this relief?
Yeah, that's a good question, John. There are quite a few. Some are not Nebraska-based. Some you read from other stories. I mean, I've said this time and again, and I would say it yet again. I'd anyone who's interested in this to read Anxious Generation and really hear, because that actually is chock full of specific anecdotes about kids. But the bullying, the individual stories of bullying, mental health issues, body dysmorphia issues, eating disorders that come from sort of unchecked use of social media, which is not even to mention sort of the other maybe milder but prevalent and almost as harmful, heavy use and sort of social isolation that comes from these that can come from these services have weighed pretty heavily on my mind and heart since I started. My daughter has not had a phone. She hasn't had these services, but certainly and my other kids do not obviously either, but certainly stories from their classmates. Not necessarily any personal ones of our close friend group or her close friend group of anyone who's had, specific suicidal thoughts or anything, but certainly enough that's out there to know that this is a big problem for kids. And I would say probably beyond that, John, as a dad, I 100% know and have had plenty of conversations with parents who feel overwhelmed by the phone, social media complex and sort of the pressure that it puts on parents. Specifically, the pressure it puts on parents to make sure their kids have full and complete access to these services as young an age as they feel comfortable. I think if you were to give truth serum to most parents, if you said, would you want your kid to have a phone as early as 6th grade and total access to Snap and all these other services? Or would you prefer they wait till they're old enough and their minds have developed enough, 15, 16, 17 years old? I would put any amount of money on saying 100 out of 100 times they would say, yeah, absolutely. I can find ways to communicate with my child, but I would prefer to keep them safe. But the vast majority, I don't know this to be true, but I believe it to be true that in my daughter's school, she's maybe the last one to have gotten a phone. And the reason is because the enormous social pressure. And so I think parents now being able to breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief, saying, you know what, there are going to be these restrictions. I don't have to worry about my child being up at 2 a.m, being on Instagram. I don't have to worry about my child being on Instagram for 6 hours. I don't have to worry the same way about my child seeing inappropriate material. There's a whole nother set of restrictions, by the way, on helping to stop predators and adults from contacting kids that I didn't mention. So I think from a parental perspective there, I've had a lot of one-on-one conversations with moms and dads who this will be, I think, a really significant relief for.